Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Backlot 605 podcast. Here we are back for our final Mel Brooks movie in Mel Brooks month here for the month of April. We are talking Dracula, Dead and Loving It. I'm one of your hosts. I'm Casey Feldman. Joining with me, as always, are my co-hosts, Sam Lenz, Brian Mensing. Brian looks like he's in like a really fancy hotel right now.
I know, if it weren't for the fact that I've got a Leslie Nielsen standing like directly behind me, it does look like I should be in like some fancy back room, but no, I've just got...
There he is. Look at that lovely, lovely man.
Yeah, when you're blocking him, it just looks like you're making a nice romantic night for yourself. You've got the fire in the background, the nice light bulbs strung up, yeah, a little wine.
Brian doesn't drink wine.
I was like, I drink. I just don't drink wine.
Well, boys, we are back talking Dracula again for the first time since October. In kind of
it's been too long.
It has been too long since we talked Dracula. Why did we not do Dracula 2000 or whatever the hell that movie was called?
Or Dracula Untold.
Oh, Dracula Untold. We could have done them all. Instead, we're talking Dracula Dead and Loving It, a sort of sequel episode, if you will, to our Dracula, or Bram Stoker's Dracula from October this last year. We talked about the Francis Ford Coppola classic during that, and we were joined by this week's guest, Shelby Hagerdon, who is back to talk about this, which we set up in that episode. We said we were going to bring you back when we did Mel Brooks month, and we're there. We're back. We're talking Dracula. Welcome back.
Look at us. Who'd have thought?
Right?
Guys, keeping your promises.
We are keeping our promises. Also, we had to bring you back. One, because obviously we had to do Dracula Dead and Loving It. It's just bound to happen. We weren't going to talk about Young Frankenstein. We don't need to talk about that. We don't want to talk about Spaceballs. Why do we need to talk? We don't need to talk to producers or High Anxiety. No, we need to talk Dracula Dead and Loving It. And we had to bring Shelby back. A lot has changed, though, since that. Shelby, you've launched a podcast. And you're working on a feature film.
I am.
All within those, 6 months, half a year, whatever, since October. You've been pretty busy.
I keep busy. I do my best.
Absolutely.
I'm working on the Film La Femme podcast right now, which is kind of an extension of Tri-State Film La Femme. It kind of does the representation for women, non-binary, LGBTQ, minority filmmakers in the area. So
that's awesome.
And your feature film, but is it Between the Lines, correct?
Between
is that
the Lines.
Title? Okay, sweet.
Yep. So we're shooting that. Yep, Sioux Falls in Iowa, starting that this summer.
That's
awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah, this is a very exciting time to be a film fan, filmmaker, film lover. Dracula Dead and Loving Its lover in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's just a great time overall to be a fan of things. So very excited to see everything that you're working on, and we're excited to have you back to talk about this. Like we said, the reason we're doing this is because of Shelby, you mentioning this and gushing over it with Sam. I swear, like 15 minutes of that podcast was you two gushing about this movie. It's finally happening. We're here. We're there.
I almost feel
we did it.
I'm glad that Casey, that you and I waited to watch it until now, just because then we've got the nostalgia crew over on one side and the newbies over here to be able to give our current perspectives on this interesting film.
I have a tremendous amount of nostalgia for this movie. Yes.
So good. And I was rewatching it. It was every line. I could recite the whole thing from memory.
Yep, absolutely.
See, that's where I kind of want to start with everyone, because obviously, just from that, Shelby, you and Sam both have a long history with this. Me and Brian have a history of 48 hours, probably, or less. I literally knew it was a Mel Brooks movie and that Leslie Nielsen was playing Dracula. That's all I knew about this movie going in. That was it. So my history with this was very, very brief. Brian, what about you? I'm sure probably the same of you knew the bare bones.
Well, and like I said earlier, is that I knew of the movie. I knew we had a Dracula comedy that was starring Leslie Nielsen. I don't know if I even remembered that it was a Mel Brooks production in the first place. Just because, mind you, this is the last directed Mel Brooks thing that he ever did, almost 30 years ago. That, I remember when it's just before I even rented it to start watching it, I'm looking at the cast because I'm like, okay, who's going to be in, who's playing what kind of thing? Because obviously he's going to be bringing up the same characters from other, Dracula iterations and whatnot. I'm like, oh my goodness, I've got, Steven Weber, Amy Yazbek is back. Peter Mcnichol, that I
Peter
absolutely
McNichol rules in this movie.
absolutely adore. Like anytime that I get to see him, like my introduction to him was Ghostbusters 2. Like anytime I get to see him throw out an absurd, stupid, obnoxious accent, I'm in.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so I looked at the cast and was like, all right, I'm already gonna like this before I even hit play, just because I know what I'm getting into. I know what players I'm already getting into. Just start spewing it at me.
Yep. Yeah.
Sam.
Okay. Me. Okay.
Your history with Mr. Dracula, who's dead and loving it.
So, I mean, do you guys remember when Netflix actually used to like curate movies and have a decent selection? And like you could actually go and search like horror comedies on Netflix, and they'd actually have like a wide list and variety of things. And it's like, oh, I can find things like Reanimator and all this stuff on it. And now they just suck.
Pun intended?
Yeah, a little bit. Sure, we'll go with pun intended. I'm smart like that. Yeah, so I found this on Netflix back in high school, or maybe like right after high school. I can't remember. It was probably over 10 years ago or so. And I watched it when I was at my girlfriend's house, and like I was just alone in the living room for some reason. Like everybody else was doing something else, and I was flipping through Netflix, and I threw this on, and I just laughed through the whole thing. And eventually like the whole family came in. They're like, what are you watching? I'm like, I'm watching this like Dracula movie that's really funny. Everybody just sat down, and like by the end we were all just riveted and laughing and just loving it. And I've just adored this movie ever since. It's popped up on streaming services here and there. And then finally when Casey and I went to Halloween-a-Palooza last year, I found it on VHS, and I'm like, this is a steal. I got to get it. So I brought it home. It's now safe with my Mel Brooks stack, and I love this movie, guys. It's great.
The way you've talked about this movie over the time and time again and whatnot, I think that even if you saw a used copy of this movie for like $50, you'd be like, that's a steal. I'm bringing it home.
Yeah, that's true. I do overspend when I love movies. I spent $20 on a not even mint condition of Night of the Comet, but that's okay. It was worth it.
And then you got it signed.
I was able to walk across the room and get it signed by Kelly Maroney, so it was worth it. I don't even care. It was like, it was the greatest. So yeah. So I love this movie, I guess, is the short of it. But yeah.
Shelby, what about you? What's your history with the movie?
Yeah, this movie's kind of just always been a part of my life. My family loves Mel Brooks, and I was kind of raised on that style of humor. And it's been kind of weird because I've been working on this historical comedy pilot, and it's so funny to I was going back and rewatching this, and how much of that humor has bled into my own comedic writing, so unintentionally, but I'm so grateful for it. This has just kind of always been a part of my life, and as that may be, but no, I started watching it as a kid, and obviously there was content in there I probably shouldn't have seen as a kid. And it was funny. I actually saw the spoof. I saw Dracula Dead and Loving It before I ever saw Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Nice.
So it was kind of funny. I got a little bit older and thought, okay, yeah, I should watch this. It's like middle school. I'm going to watch this because why not? And it was so funny to kind of have that realization of, oh my gosh, the great satire in this work is like, it's phenomenal. It's fantastic.
You're like, when does Gary Oldman take the weird buns off his head?
When does it come off? Where's the wig stand at?
Yeah.
Well,
that was absolutely, that was me and Young Frankenstein. I saw Young Frankenstein before I watched any of the Boris Karloff movies.
Yeah.
And then when I watched the Boris Karloff movies, I was like, when are they gonna like dance to Putting on the Ritz? Like, what is
funny?
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's one thing that like I wish that we would get better quality in terms of like your horror comedies or something like that, because especially for like a younger age group or something like that, because granted, yeah, you Shelby, you made the comment about there's probably stuff in Dead and Loving It as a child you probably should not have been watching.
Yeah.
But at the same time too, you go from Dead and Loving It to Bram Stoker's Dracula, even if you're at that same age, you're going to go into Bram Stoker's and go, there's really stuff I shouldn't be looking at.
Yes.
But at the same time too, it's that, you know, like that good gateway of it's fun, it's familiar to be able to get you into something that is more streamlined, like a horror or something like that. Like comedy is a good way for anybody to get into any sort of subgenre, like a rom-com. Like if you're like, you know, I'm not so much about romance, but hey, a rom-com, you can still have fun with it. Yeah. Horror comedy, like I don't know if we necessarily get like the good horror comedies like we used to in the last 20-25 years.
I don't think so either, and it's actually really disappointing because I think we, like, as a society, I don't think we take comedy seriously enough.
Yeah.
Because it's such a fantastic medium for telling stories. And it was actually, there was Taika Waititi was talking about this. I was just looking at a quote from him the other day about like how we're just not recognizing comedy as a serious art form to be able to tell these great stories. And obviously, you know, like he made Jojo Rabbit, which I mean, that should not be a comedy, but it is, and it makes the story absolutely perfect, and it's so relatable.
Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing the story through like a kid's eyes, and I don't know. I wish that, you know, kind of that horror comedy, because it's such a great introduction into the horror genre, and I mean, there's such great horror being made right now. Why can't we make Midsummer funny? You know, I mean, there's so much potential there.
It wasn't already.
I laughed.
I mean.
As soon as the bear suit comes out, I'm like, this is the funniest thing ever.
There's laughter to be had in Midsommar, but
I don't know if there is, Sam.
I mean, everything Will Poulter does is really funny.
Okay.
Everything Will Poulter, when he's tripping on mushrooms and he's telling everybody else that they have to lay down with him, I'm like,
okay,
that's funny. I was gonna say realistic, but I wouldn't know.
But you know, Shelby, you're absolutely right though. I mean, just because of all these stuff, you know, there isn't oh my god, my brain just lost me there for a minute there.
Well, I think the difference with today's quote unquote horror comedy is that it leans more towards horror than the comedy, in my opinion.
Oh, really?
I think
it's the stupid comedy.
Yeah, it's stupid comedy, and it's almost like offensive for the sake of being offensive, and that shock humor, which like I don't know. I was actually having this conversation the other day with another writer about how comedy, like how we move forward in comedy, because there was such a great period when Mel Brooks was producing. I mean, you have great, fantastic comedies coming out, and you kind of hit that late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of like the toilet shock humor. I mean, and you kind of come out of that, and we've had Booksmart and some other great comedies come out, but it's kind of been hard, I think, to be able to find that balance for writers of, you know, how stupid can we get? Where's the offensive line? You know, where are we? And I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see where comedy goes after this.
That's where I think that's part of it. You mentioned about that, is that there's so many times that right now we're in that weirdly weird awkward stage where so many people are afraid to go up to the line because they're afraid they're going to cross that line. Because, you know, you think of like movies like Tropic Thunder, you know, where, you know, people would say if you try to make that movie nowadays, you know, the whole thing that Robert Downey Jr. does with the whole blackface thing. It's like, you don't understand. Even if you made that movie today, that's the point that was the point they were trying to make in that movie. You don't take offense in something that wasn't meant to be offensive. But I also did remember what I was going to say is the reason why I think we have issues with some of these comedies today is because it's hard to make a comedy because we have to be smart about it because some of the best comedy comes from a dark place and everybody's all about trying to make the stupid funny fart joke that like you think of like a Robin Williams or Mel Brooks or something like that. Comedy comes from a dark place, and that's where some of that good stuff comes from, and everybody's just all like, well, we can't go to that dark place anymore because we're afraid we're afraid we can't cross that line.
I actually think the opposite in terms of horror comedy is that we go to the darker place where it's more of a dark comedy than it is a Mel Brooks slapstick comedy that's actually good, like Dracula Dead and Loving It or Young Frankenstein. Good movies that are still pretty slapstick and goofy, but like today's like horror comedies are dark comedies. Like one I just thought of is Fresh from this past year, which is an extremely dark subject matter, but the way it's presented is really funny in the same vein of American Psycho. Very dark movie, very funny movie too. I think that's where we're at right now, but we've talked about this in the entire month of great spoof is gone. Like we don't have great spoof movies. We tried to bring up some last week on the show, and what did we say was the last one? It was like
Black Dynamite, wasn't it?
Black Dynamite, and that was like 2000.
But that was an outlier. Before that, it was like we kind of decided on like not another teen movie being like the last gasp of actual satire before Scary Movie and Date Movie and all those like kind of just derailed the genre. Have you guys watched X yet?
Not
Yeah.
yet.
Has anybody okay, so X
I saw it in the
is
theater.
okay, yeah. X is a very funny movie, but it's dark. Like its humor comes from the fact that you're watching something very grotesque happening. And it's like it uses some really good editing for some pitch black humor sequences that like I think X might be one of the funniest horror movies that I've seen in a while, but it's not a comedy. Like it's one of those weird things where like horror comedy is it's either entirely Tucker and Dale versus Evil type of thing where it's like it's more of a comedy than a horror, or it's something like X where it's like, well, this is horror, it just happens to be a little bit funny. I don't feel like you're seeing as many completely balance that. Even ones that I really like Happy Death Day and Freaky, those are more comedy than they are horror. And I don't know, but I still love those. I agree. I think horror comedy is in a very different place than it used to be.
I think that's going to lead me into my first point I want to talk about in this movie. Because this is, it's a Mel Brooks movie. You know what you're kind of getting into when you watch a Mel Brooks movie.
Right.
So when I put this on, obviously knowing Mel Brooks, Leslie Nielsen, Dracula, the opening credits start playing. I'm like, I didn't click on some other Dracula movie because this is terrifying. The opening credits of this movie.
It opens like a horror movie.
Are incredible. Setting up this mythos of Dracula and vampires and how terrifying they are. And how like just it's part of this mythology that's been passed down hundreds of years right before we get to like Leslie Nielsen being Leslie Nielsen in the movie. And it's such a weird way of opening the movie, but it's also a perfect way to open up the movie because I think what Mel Brooks does so well, especially in this movie, is balance like you guys have said, if this is your introduction to Dracula, you're going to love this because it's kind of a fun, goofy introduction to it. If you're a Dracula fan, you're going to catch all these little hints, Easter eggs, homages to previous works in it. And I think the opening credits kind of set that up right away of like, no, this is a Dracula movie, first and foremost. It just happens to be a really goofy comedy.
Well, which is why I'm kind of glad we did Dracula Month. When we did Dracula Month just in general and whatnot, and have you not seen this? Because, it's one of those things you start picking up on little things. And clearly and obviously there's a lot of parallels to Bram Stoker's Dracula, to Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. But at the same time, too, like if we hadn't talked about the early Dracula, some of the other stuff and whatnot, there's little things that Mel Brooks is playing callbacks to that is not Bram Stoker's Dracula. That I'm like, okay, I'm picking up on this. Where it's pretty much where it's like he's taking his homage. He's more or less spoofing Coppola while giving homage to the other Draculas of Dracula's past, while giving him his spin on his comedy and whatnot. Where like, I think that you almost, if you are an adult going into this movie, I'd almost feel like go into other Draculas first to understand why Mel Brooks made the movie he did. Because like, I'm looking at the Rotten Tomatoes reviews of these movies and I'm like, did you not understand? He understood the assignment. You clearly did not.
Yeah, critics were really harsh on this.
The critics got it wrong. I'm sorry,
they did not understand it.
Mm-hmm. No, it's like they're like, oh, he's gonna make his Dracula. That's exactly what he did. He made Mel Brooks's Dracula. Yeah. And you know, I think he executed it like Mel Brooks would have executed it. You know, and again, with the talent he put into that movie was very synonymous for 1995.
Well, you can tell there was quite a bit of research done to make this film. I mean, he didn't just go in and say, okay, I'm going to make Dracula. I mean, you can feel the influence of Nosferatu with Renault. You can feel the Universal. You can feel Coppola. I mean, it's all there. I mean, if you're looking for it, you can definitely find it. I mean, that villager scene at the beginning is so perfectly Murnau. I mean, the color, everything. It's perfect Nosferatu. And I think that a lot of the critics kind of overlooked that because it's such a perfect piece of satire that nobody understood.
The one villager with the big mustache that just shakes his cheek, he looks exactly like the one from the Lugosi one.
Yes.
And I love that. And it's just, let's just take all this stuff, but heighten it to this really funny reality that Mel Brooks puts his movies in. It's perfect. And I mean, for me, kind of the impetus of that, or like the kind of, I don't know, golden child of that in this movie is Peter Mcnichol, because he's portraying Renfield like Renfield has been portrayed in every other movie. It's just played for comedy this time instead of being just a crazy person.
He's my favorite Renfield since Dwight Fry, because Dwight Fry to me is still always going to be the MVP. Like, no performance is ever going to top that. But Peter Mcnichol comes really close for me. He's just so good in this.
Well, even looks and acts like Dwight Fry too. There's the
he
shot
has the same bug-eyed mania that I really appreciate. Yeah.
There's the part where they're opening the basement to the ship, and it's the exact same shot as Dwight Fry in Lugosi's version. This is. Yeah, Mel Brooks, you know what the hell you were doing.
Well, and that's why I mentioned it's if you're going to go into this, I would say is don't go into this completely blind. Go in watching other Dracula movies first, because you can clearly see that he's paying homage to these and whatnot. Because that's exactly what I thought of when I'm seeing Renfield show up on screen. Because clearly you see. Leslie Nielsen, he's definitely trying to pull the Gary Oldman version from Coppola, but Renfield is definitely not the Coppola version of Renfield. That is definitely old school Renfield. And anytime he can throw out a stupid accent that makes no sense, I'm 100% for it.
Yeah. It's really cool too. I want to go back to what you were saying, Casey, about the opening credits being so scary, and being very straightforward, and you kind of think you're doing the wrong movie. I had a very similar reaction to What We Do in the Shadows, which kind of lifts that idea, where there's some genuinely terrifying vampire visuals. They use old paintings, and the music in it is very ominous and dark, but everything that's happening is so ludicrous and funny that I don't think Waititi and Clement and all the other people that worked on What We Do in the Shadows, I don't think they make that movie without Dracula Dead and Loving It. And I've never seen Dracula Dead and Loving It come back to the forefront of cinematic talk And that bums me out because it's very clearly a precursor to a lot of the vampire comedies that we're seeing now. You know, from the What We Do in the Shadows movie to the TV series, like there's so much that Dracula Dead and Loving has influenced, as much as the Hammer Draculas, as much as the Lugosi and the Universal monsters, as much as Francis Ford Coppola's. Definitely more so than the 79 Franklin Jello one, because I didn't like that one, but that's okay.
I would agree with you though, Sam, with What We Do in the Shadows and with Vampires Suck even. If anybody even remembers that movie.
I watched it.
It's definitely there. The influence is there. And I would agree though that a lot of that horror comedy that specifically within vampires and Dracula that we see today would not exist without some kind of precursor like Mel Brooks and with this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think this movie will eventually get some sort of resurgence in pop culture where people are like, yeah, why were we sleeping on this movie in 1995? And I think that's really curious why people were. I mean, it was sort of a changing of the guard of comedy during that time. We had Jim Carrey, Adam Sandler, Mike Myers, character type of performers coming into the limelight, and I think that could be part of it, where people like, Mel Brooks, he's the old guard. Let's let these new young bucks into the group, and I think that could definitely be part of what people were looking for in 1995. That being said, this movie still holds up remarkably well, and I know I said it last week when we were talking about Robin Hood Men in Tights that I thought the production design and production value was mediocre, like felt like a TV show more than a movie. No, Dracula Dead and Loving, it looks like a goddamn movie. Like, there's incredible matte paintings in this movie. The way Mel Brooks shoots it looks like a Dracula movie. We're never outside of that universe, where I felt Robin Hood, it was like, now we're just kind of in the woods. Here it's like, no, we're in London, we're in Transylvania, wherever this movie is taking place. That's where we're at. It's such a great looking movie too. I don't think people give it a lot of credit for that. I mean, they don't give it a lot of credit, period, but it's a great looking movie.
I was going to say.
No, the production designers on this did a fantastic job. They definitely did the research.
Oh, I would definitely have to agree with all of that. I mean, it overall just looks beautiful. And I mean, even when some of the absurd comedy kind of rolls out, it doesn't feel like it's out of place. It just feels like, okay, if you were making movies 200 years ago and whatnot, this is what it would have looked like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's humor always comes, like, the humor never feels like it doesn't fit in with the world that Brooks is creating here, and that's I think the biggest complaint I have with so many modern comedies is I feel like they break out of the vibe that they're going for, especially the ones that are like very unscripted and you can tell they just let people like riff off of each other. It's like, well, eventually you just become two people like trying to outsmart each other and it takes you out of the movie, and that's not how Mel Brooks operated. And he, we kind of talked about it in Robin Hood Men in Tights, but like he wasn't above like recycling the idea of a joke, but he never did it exactly the same way twice. There's always something to differentiate it, to move it forward. And I think, coming back to the horror genre after he made like a masterpiece with Young Frankenstein, coming back to do not just another horror movie, but another like classic monster movie, that could have been disastrous. And this movie is not. It doesn't repeat any of the same, like, it's not in black and white. Very few gags are reused from like Young Frankenstein. And I think he revisited the well, but I don't know, he made it sparkling this time. Like,
well, and that's where it's like,
I lost the metaphor, but you guys get what I'm saying.
That's where I say it's like he takes the ideas and he takes the script of how the movie's played out for the sake of Dracula, and it's like, how can I put my shtick? How can I put my jokes into this? Because like I think of like when they kill Lucy, and
it's the best scene in the whole movie,
and
it seriously
it's like,
cracks me up.
And anybody who knows the story of Dracula knows that scene is coming. it's like, okay, so he's like, all right, I have to put the scene in here, but how can I make it my version of it? And he's like, well, of course we're going to splatter blood, but I'm going to splatter blood in Mel Brooks kind of way. And poor Steven Weber is going to get the brunt of it.
Steven Weber is such a trooper in that scene.
Yeah. And that's one thing I don't think the critics understood, is that it's like, okay, I'm gonna take classic Dracula and I'm going to overlay Brooks over it. I'm not just gonna make a dumb Dracula movie just for the sake of making a dumb Dracula movie.
Well, It almost feels like, to me, watching this, it almost feels like I'm watching Dracula with Mel Brooks.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like that line actually in that scene, I absolutely adore that, when the blood's everywhere and he just looks down and goes, we should have laid out newspapers. That it's so clever and it's so lost, but I can just picture Mel Brooks watching the original, like watching Coppola's Dracula and just going, man, they should have put something on the ground. They should have put out newspapers. It's such a funny, quick line, and it doesn't need to be there, but it is, and it's perfect. But it just it feels so much like I'm watching this movie with this writer, and he's just doing his commentary on it.
Well, that's just like you make you make a very valid point too, because obviously there's so much parallel to Coppola's Dracula, especially for the Leslie Nielsen aspect of it. Casey, you made mention, like, one of the first things you talked about is the fact that he takes off the helmet that is the hair. And I remember seeing Gary Oldman for the very first time, and you're like, you're going to take that off, right? Like, I've seen the trailer. You look younger in other parts of this movie. And it's probably one of those things where he's watching Coppola's and he's like, yeah, that's coming off. That's coming off at some point, right? Well, if I'm making this movie, that shit's coming off.
Yeah. Well, and the staking scene is so perfect because it's something that you've seen in a Dracula movie before, but it goes to an unexpected place. Like you've never seen a Dracula movie where they spray blood like it's the Nickelodeon Teen Choice Awards, and it's nuts. And I just love how Mel Brooks just slides behind the wall every time. And then there's the follow-up scene where they ask him, they're like, my God, man, you don't have a spot of blood on you. And he just goes like, after 10 or 12 of these things, you just know where to stand during a staking.
I also feel like during that staking scene, you can feel Steven Weber, not Harker, Steven Weber, increasingly getting like, oh my God, are we doing this again? Am I going to have to get splattered again? And just the fact that it's Mel Brooks that he's acting against, who hides behind a wall, he gets showered with this Evil Dead blood gush coming out of this casket. It's perfect.
It feels like you're watching him be directed in real time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
and he probably is.
Once.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to rebuild that set after you spray blood all over it. They got one take. This is it. Jonathan, do a good job.
And thank God Steven Weber didn't break, because I mean,
I would have broke.
You could tell by the end he wanted to break so bad.
And there's no cutaways in that scene either.
No.
I mean, it is a solid. I mean, it almost plays out like a stage play.
Yeah.
Which there are so many moments in this film too that just it feels like I'm watching a play, which I adore.
Yeah, it's great because it's very reminiscent to the 31 Bela Lugosi one, where it's like, oh yeah, I mean, you're essentially watching a stage play that someone just kind of filmed,
Mm-hmm.
And I love that aspect of it. It's
To speak on your point of this being like you're watching the movie with Mel Brooks, I had that with the introduction of Leslie Nielsen, where it's the Lugosi introduction, where he's standing on the steps, and when he just falls down, I lost it completely, because I feel like that's Mel Brooks watching that and just like whispering to his friend, "What if he tripped?" And like that's what he does in the movie. It's so perfect.
Or his response to with the shadow. Like he's like, if I was the shadow, I would have been like, nope, I'm out.
The shadow gags are so funny in this.
So clever too.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I just and
like, that's not what my shadow would do.
The shadow is just almost like Dracula's unchecked id, and it's just like and you're just like, oh my God, it's it's literally him grappling with his own urges at times. And it's just the greatest. Like, it's such a good representation because, I mean, if you look back at like Coppola's Dracula, it's a fairly similar theme. Like, they just take it in a more comedic route. And I think that's great. Yeah. Mel Brooks knows how to take like thematic, rich works and keep everything that makes them thematic and rich.
Yeah.
But you don't realize how much you're like absorbing because you're laughing too hard. And then by the end of it, you're like, wow, there was actually like there were some really good performances in this. Like, I feel like I watched Young Frankenstein. I'm like, I feel like I learned something, you know, and I shouldn't having this good of a time, but you do. And that when Brooks is firing on all cylinders, that's how I feel at the end of his movies. And I love it.
This might be my favorite Dracula Renfield combo ever put to film, because it feels like Dracula's the main villain and Renfield's just his bumbling sidekick that just listens to his every command and is literally bumbling throughout this movie. Because one of my favorite scenes while watching this was when they're on the ship and Dracula's in the coffin underneath the deck, and the rope comes untied and just slides across the other side, and then Renfield jumps on top of it. It's just a single static shot, and I'm like, this looks like a Charlie Chaplin short. The way Mel Brooks is shooting, it's so good, and it kind of again harkens back to those Universal movies and how those looked. Like if that was in black and white, you'd be like, yeah, this is from 1930.
I'd buy it.
That's when it came out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's still so damn funny.
Yeah.
Also, Peter Mcnichol is like doing all his stunts in this movie, and it's pretty damn insane some of the shit he's going through.
Yeah.
Like he is taking a lot of falls in this movie where it's that static shot, and it's like, yeah, that's not a stunt double. That's him taking all these falls.
And you know what? I think that's something else that we're missing from a lot of modern comedy is that fantastic physical comedy. You know, we had Jim Carrey for that bit, but kind of that older, Charlie Chaplin-esque. I think we're missing that right now. And I would love to see somebody come back and really reinvigorate that, because I think that physical comedy is just, it's fantastic. And he does such a good job in this film. Because like Renfield's such a physical character, and being able to really embody that. I mean, I love the scene with the doctor where
at the table.
Yes. I mean, it's great. It's fantastic. And like just like the little bug on the side of his mouth, his facial expressions are so just particularly on point the whole time. It's fantastic.
And then him just like chucking the spoon over onto the patio to go get it. Like, yeah, it's tremendous. That scene is like a staple for what I like. I remember watching this for the first time, and like Dracula tripping and falling was funny, and I was like laughing, and that was the scene where I was like, oh, I'm like super into this movie, because everything Peter Mcnichol is doing is just incredible. It's a great physical performance, but on top of that, just every character beat and Seward's reactions to him. And then, of course, it's a stupid running gag, but I love the enema running gag. I think it's the funniest thing. Put him in a straitjacket and give him an enema. Wait,
well, I like even
give him an enema and then put him in the straitjacket.
But one thing I agree. It feels like the joke is dumb to the point where you're like, all right, let's be done with it and whatnot. But just the way he interjects it going forward, you get to that point where you're like, now you're expecting the joke because you want that punchline now. Even to the point where he gets to the point where he's like, you know what else to do? Like he doesn't even have to say enema anymore. You're just like, yeah, he's got a thing for enemas and it's coming. We know it's coming. When's the next one coming?
This has like the most like character to Dr. Seward of any of the Dracula movies too. Like,
right?
I just realized that as we're talking about him, like he's actually like a part of the group and like one of the main one of the main characters and driving forces to get Dracula by the end of the movie. His joke is that he wants everybody to have an enema that he runs across, but
and it's kind of surprising that he wasn't a more utilized character earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a great character, and I mean, I come from history, so obviously, so it's kind of like that psychologist, and that trope is so fantastic from that time, and they almost give him that little bit of a Freudian-esque character to him, which it plays so well in a movie like this. So it's kind of disappointing that we aren't seeing more from Dr. Seward in other movies, because I would love to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the prior movies typically focus on, Harker and, Mina or Lucy, depending on if they flip-flop the names like they did in 79, whatever. Ugh, I hated 79. I can't get that out of my system enough. It was just not good. It was Saturday Night Fever, but with Dracula.
It 100% was, and I was totally into it.
I wasn't vibing with it. I just wasn't.
But that's the thing though. You bring up like if they were ever to revisit this here, it's to the point where like I don't know how Hollywood could really revisit this. That's going to give us something new and fresh. Even to the point where Brooks is like, you know what? I've gotten to a point where I've spoofed it too, and like, I mean, where do we go from here? Where we're not just feeling like, okay, now we're just going to keep doing it. Let's move on to something else though.
That's when you call in the Cage.
This is
you
true.
bring it.
You've got
all right. What are we doing next? We're calling in Nicolas Cage to play Dracula.
I'm so excited about.
I retract my statement because yes, my brain did for a momentary lapse forget they're making Renfield, and then we've got Nick Cage in the Dracula movie. So I stand corrected. I will wait till that is done because I agree that looks just off the wall like bonkers to what we're currently missing from the last almost 30 years since this came out.
Spoilers, that's my pick for the double feature. It's not even a movie that's out yet, but it's the Nicolas Cage Renfield.
They're calling it Renfield. And I'm like, Renfield is a character that's very special to me. I love Renfield. And when they announced that Nick Holt was going to play him, I'm like, okay, I'm good with that. Nick Holt will do a good job. He was tremendous in Mad Max Fury Road. He had that like weirdo, like crazed vibe to him, and that he's gonna nail it because he's who's playing Renfield, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I thought so. Yeah. I love that guy. I think he's great. Even when he's in terrible X-Men movies, he's still great.
He plays a great zombie. He plays a great zombie when it comes to making a Romeo and Juliet movie. I'm just saying.
This is true.
I'm a sucker for warm bodies.
I love that movie. I think it's
that
great.
M83 needle drop just gets me every time. I'm just like, yeah. Yep.
It's so good.
It is. Oh God. Sorry. I always talk about other movies. I get us all off track.
I'm gonna segue us back to Dracula Dead and Loving because what everybody was talking about on the internet for a while was what Nicolas Cage looks like as Dracula, and I want to talk about what Leslie Nielsen looks like as Dracula because he is literally just wearing a Halloween store costume of Dracula the entire movie, and it is so goddamn funny when he shows up to the theater wearing that still, and I'm like, oh, I know what you're doing here, and this is hilarious because he's just wearing this like he's like the typical version of Dracula you'd expect, the red with the little
medallion
brooch thing,
and the cape. The entire movie doesn't change costume or look at all, and it is so funny that no one questions it either, that he's just this creepy old man wearing this. It's so funny. It is so funny.
Well, it's a perfectly like store-bought costume too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean,
it looks like he took it right off the rack of a Spirit of Halloween.
Yeah.
He's like, hey Leslie, do you fit in this? Yes, that's what you're wearing for the entire shoot.
This is a one size fits all, so figure it out. Thank you.
Yep. If you don't fit in it, go get it fitted. But speaking of the theater and whatnot, I love the fact that when he comes up to the gal and says that this is the message you need to do, but then forget everything so she doesn't remember to give the message.
Yes. And the delayed response when she finally does remember, it's like she comes in and like Leslie Nielsen's reaction in that moment where his eyes just pop out and he's just so frustrated, it just kills me. It's so funny.
The jokes because
it's the joke on the joke, honest for me, because like you expect you're waiting for that punchline of her forgetting. And
Yeah.
you're laughing through that punchline. Then all of a sudden he's like, "All right, I'm gonna go do this for myself." And then she comes up and she puts the icing on top of it. You're like, "Wow, you literally just layered that joke, and that was just that made it even better."
Yeah, he goes for the expected, and then he pushes it into the unexpected,
Mhm.
and it's just the best. Yeah, it's a perfect gag.
All the jokes with like Dracula's powers, again, Mel Brooks like watching Dracula and just like making jokes at it, or with it.
When he's trying to hypnotize the two ladies.
When he's hypnotizing the maid and Mina and keeps getting the two mixed up. Like when he says, "Oh, and watch out for the stool," and just she trips over the stool. It's
Once again, that physical comedy piece. Like you don't see stuff like that anymore.
Well, it's
I'm a
physical
sucker for
comedy.
good slapstick.
And that's another one of those scenes where it feels exactly like a stage play.
Yeah.
I would not
Oh.
question it at all. At
Yep.
all. It's
Absolutely.
How
Yeah,
has no one
it's-
adapted Dracula Dead and Loving It into a stage play?
I was just thinking,
Right? Yeah.
I found
We
our next
should.
project.
let's do it.
I think it would play really well.
It would. It would play so well.
If the producers can become a stage play into a movie, why can't we take a movie and put it into a stage play that's Mel Brooks?
Come on.
I call being the blood rig guy. Like I want to be the one with the tube, like blowing blood up at whoever we have playing Jonathan Harker. That's gonna be my job. That's
Well,
all I
let's
want to do.
We'll bring back Steven Weber. He can reprise his role as Harker.
Heck yeah.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
I want to even go into the fact that we're playing on these tropes that are the things that we know that Dracula does or can do in terms of the hypnosis and whatnot. But I love the play on the fact that we can't see vampires in their reflection.
Yes.
And we have so much fun with it. All of a sudden we get into that whole dance sequence, and everybody's like, "Oh, everything's fine, Daddy," until they start seeing all of a sudden you just see her flying around all by herself and getting lifted up into the air. That gag probably, could have been cut in half, but that's again where Brooks is like, you know what? I'm going to have fun with this gag for as long as I can possibly pull this off. And he's like, "Oh, we did this. We're going to do it again, but we're going to do it this way." And he just keeps, like you said, Sam, he's recycling it, but he keeps redoing the same gag, but better, and just keeps upping that ante all within that same scene.
And
Absolutely.
That's such a good scene to study from a comedy writing standpoint, especially because, and also just from a production standpoint too, of like how to shoot comedy, because you're getting those reactions from everyone. You're getting Jonathan's reaction of, "Oh, she's doing quite well on her own." I mean, it's such a good little stick in there, and that beautiful sweeping pan from them dancing to the mirror of her just by herself. I mean, it's fantastic. It's so great.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be that good, but it's great.
Yeah.
And it works so well in it. And it kind of sticks with that kind of Coppola-esque classic. Like you can tell that this is it's like they took Coppola and they took the set pieces and they just made it funny. They had the same cameramen come on, do their work. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's stupid. It's great.
Yeah.
I just
Oh my
love
gosh.
that the premise is the Coppola version, but let's put Leslie Nielsen in it instead, because everyone else is playing this pretty straight. Even I mean, one thing we haven't touched on yet, Harker, Van Helsing,
Steven
and Seward kind of team up, to figure out, well, who's Dracula. They're just a bunch of bumbling idiots the entire time. Especially Harker, like you said, like making the line of, "Well, she's doing quite well on her own." Or later when Renfield yells, "Master, master." "Oh, Mister, Mister." Later, he's like, "Oh, I thought he yelled Mister."
Yep.
My favorite Harker moment is when the undead Lucy is trying to seduce him, and he just, "But Lucy, I'm British."
Such a good line.
It's such a good line. I just everything in that sequence leading up to the stake is just the best from him. Like Steven Weber's a freaking trooper, and it's so fun to see him play against Amy Yazbek too, because I don't know if y'all are Wings fans, but like I love me Wings. Like Wings is like one of my favorite sitcoms ever. And those two together in that show were so good. And that's actually, I think that's why I ended up playing Dracula Dead and Loving It on Netflix, because I saw that both of them were in it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'll definitely watch this. And just, yeah, ended up loving it. And then realizing it was a Mel Brooks movie. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course, that's why I loved it. But yeah, I just think those two are the, I mean, Nielsen's great, but I think Weber and Yazbek are just incredible in this movie. Like Yazbek is, like, we kind of talked about it in Men in Tights. She's playing the roles that I feel like if this had been done a decade earlier, Madeline Kahn would have been in.
Yeah.
You know, and she's such a good person to, not necessarily, like, she's not taking over for her, but you know what I mean? Like, it's clear that there was kind of like a shift in the comedy guard, and she is such, like,
Agreed.
she's just as underrated as Kahn was. And I wish that she was still doing more, because she's such a talent. And I get joy from watching her in just about anything. And yeah, like,
well, you referenced the fact that, you know, Weber and Yazbek already had this chemistry prior to this movie because of Wings and whatnot, to the point where it's like, I wish that if Mel Brooks had still been continuing to make movies, that we would have gotten another Steven Weber, Amy Yazbek collaboration in another Mel Brooks movie, because I agree. I think there's something about their chemistry together, whether it be in this or when they were, like I said, when they were in Wings and whatnot, that I think would have definitely allowed them to allow Brooks to keep making more with those two together. I mean, again, I've referenced this before, is everybody in this cast is, they're not phoning it in. They're being very true to what they're like you said, Casey. The only one who's not playing this like a drama basically is Leslie Nielsen. He's clearly the comedy. Everybody's everybody's having their comedic moments, but they're playing it straight.
Yeah.
And I would love to have seen even Leslie Nielsen do more Mel Brooks, Steven Weber do more Mel Brooks, because I mean, if anything of talking about all these Mel Brooks movies has said, is the fact that Mel Brooks knows who to put in front of the camera when he's putting the movies together. And I just wish this would not have been the last thing that he had made.
Yeah. No one assembles a cast like Mel Brooks. Like, absolutely no one. You know, people talk about ensembles. Like, I guess, like, Wes Anderson puts together pretty awesome casts.
Yeah.
But, like, you know, you just don't see that as much anymore. Not in the mainstream anyways. And I wish a good ensemble cast was worth more weight in Hollywood right now, because there's something to be said about, especially in comedy, about a group of people that all get their moments to shine, but are also just very giving performers to the, like, there's just like this symbiosis between everybody that just works. And you just don't see that as much anymore in mainstream movies.
That's honestly something that I've really enjoyed. I don't know if you guys have watched the show yet, but Our Flag Means Death on HBO
I
Max.
started it the other night. I loved it. I have not finished it yet, but I'm so excited.
I've watched the show 3 times now. I'm obsessed. It's great.
That's awesome.
But it's so, like, the casting in it is so fantastic, because you have, like, this crew of pirates, and it's such a fantastic ensemble crew of, like, everybody's playing off of each other at all times. And you have Rhys Darby and Taika Waititi, who are perfect together. I mean, you have Flight of the Conchords. I mean, they've worked together, and you have such great chemistry between those two anyway. And then putting them in a show together where they can just, like, riff off each other and just, you know, I mean, they have such great chemistry. And I think that it's something that we haven't really been seen as of late in comedy. And it makes me so happy to see this being pulled back, especially with that show.
Yep, absolutely.
You make mention about that, like, for modern day filmmakers and whatnot. I think Taika might be as close to as to Mel Brooks that we have seen in 30 years. Because again, as much as I like my Kevin Smith movies, and I like my Kevin Smith, you know, he makes his funny movies, but even he himself would be like, I make stupid, dumb comedies. we need somebody who makes a good, smart comedy, and Taika might be the first one I think that we've seen in 30 years.
Well, and Taika does it so smart, and he does it without he's never, it's never offensive. It's never hurting anybody. He's always very careful with what he's making, what he's creating, what he's involved in. And he tells such beautiful stories through comedy. And I think that that's something, Mel Brooks did such a fantastic job of, okay, this is a great story just on its own.
Yeah.
Let's make it funny. And I think Taika is doing that same thing of, this is a great story. How can we make it funny? How can we make this more accessible to a general audience too?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you even look at Waititi's work on Thor Ragnarok, and that's largely a story about Indigenous people being misplaced. It's a very when people are like, "Oh, it's way too goofy," I'm like, "There's a lot of serious."
There's a lot of layers there if you peel them back.
Heavy word.
Yeah, it's don't be confused by the candy colored coding and the laughs that come. That movie has some really good stuff to say. I think it's a really
and there he goes.
He's gone.
That's nothing new to Sam. But that's where I think Taika is a direct response to I would almost bet to say you probably would ask him who's an influential director to you as a filmmaker. And you can't tell me he's not going to say Mel Brooks is at least one of those, filmmakers and whatnot. Because even Sam, you mentioned about the candy coating that is Thor Ragnarok, is he knows how to tell a good story and put the sugar coat on it to make it, to give people the reason to appeal to them. Just as much as Mel Brooks is I have a good story I want to tell, but I'm going to put Mel Brooks on top of it so I can make it funny.
Yeah.
See, I think that's the evolution that we've seen in comedy, because Taika Waititi, or the name that keeps coming to mind for other influential comedy, I don't even know if I would call him a comedy director either. Jim Cummings is the name that keeps coming to mind.
Yeah,
because of what he does is so subversive of a comedy. Of he does these deep character dramas, but and you get genuine belly laughs out of it, but it's because of character moments. And obviously that's kind of to an extreme end of what Mel Brooks was doing, but I think that's what we're seeing now is no one's trying to be the next Mel Brooks or David Zucker or the Wayans brothers anymore, like we had in the mid 2000s of everybody trying to make those. I think what we're seeing in the evolution of comedy is everybody's that's really standing out is having their own voice and their own things to say. Like Taika Waititi, you understand it's a Taika Waititi movie, or Jim Cummings, James Gunn. And as far as ensembles go, I think again that's sort of gone to the wayside because of the big groups are all kind of sticking together. Like Kevin Smith has his Kevin Smith crew. Adam Sandler has his crew. Will Ferrell has his crew. They all have, Seth Rogen has his. They don't really go outside that. It's more of ensembles in that respect of real life friends all coming together instead of this. Obviously, I'm sure everybody on Dracula Dead and Loving It was friendly and cordial, and from what I've heard, it was a very fun movie to shoot. But again, it's Mel Brooks pulling all these people into this movie. So I think that's, I don't know. I think we're ready for some more comedic minds to start stepping up and stepping into these. But also, comedy has changed a lot, even in the last 30 years. Like the one that comes to mind of kind of modern versions of Mel Brooks, if you will, is the Lonely Island guys. But what they do also is very, very different than what Mel Brooks did.
Well, you talk about the sake of the ensembles and whatnot, and I think of in terms of somebody who could potentially pull off the comedy while still telling a good story, though, that I think is for the sake of being able to handle a massive ensemble cast right now. I can only think of is James Gunn. To have the ensemble cast that he pulled. The people he pulled together when they first said he was doing Guardians of the Galaxy, you're like an unknown IP. With the guy from Parks and Rec is going to be your star. The fat guy from Parks and Rec is going to be your star. You have a wrestler whose biggest thing was that man with the iron fist. You look at some of these and you're like, what James Gunn did for Guardians should not have worked.
Yeah.
But it's like, what we're also missing. Not only are we having issues with trying to get a good ensemble comedy satire, is trying to find the good director like Mel Brooks was to be able to direct a good ensemble together. Because as much as I know that Casey's not a fan of the Suicide Squad that James Gunn did, Sam and I both agree is the fact that one of the reasons why that ensemble cast works as beautiful and as good as it does is because its Gunn knows how to be able to handle a massive cast like that.
Yeah.
I wonder too, if collectively the industry could kind of come together and recognize comedy as a serious, genre.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Would that kind of push more directors to, okay, I'm going to put together my ensemble cast. I'm going to really work at this. Because I mean, if you look at any of the awards for a great ensemble cast, they are always going to serious narrative works. How can we bring that into comedy as an industry? How do we make people see that as this is a viable form? We should be looking at this. We should be focused on this.
Yeah. Why is it that us film enthusiasts, us film lovers of movies or whatever, look at a comedy and say, how much work, how much effort goes into making a person laugh? It's really easy. Maybe I don't make movies, whatever cases, but in terms of try to make a person cry, give them an emotional moment and whatnot. But to get a person to laugh is harder than getting a person to cry. You can put something on screen that makes somebody die. You're going to want to cry. To get a person to laugh, I think is so much harder. And I agree with you, Shelby. I don't think comedy gets the recognition, even to the point where, like, you talk about like the Golden Globes, where they mix musical and comedy together, and then just so a movie can get nominated, they put like The Martian in that category because there's no room.
That's
in
what
the drama.
I was just going to say. Let's
Because
have this sci-fi drama win Best Musical or Comedy.
Yeah, exactly. Because they don't take it well enough to go, I'm sorry, you can't put The Martian in that category because it's not a musical or it's a comedy. Like, is there some occasional funny things about it? Yeah, but that's not what that movie is. To the point where they're like, even the award shows don't even be like, no.
Yeah, the award shows are weird anyway.
Agreed.
I mean,
and I think too.
One thing we had was 10 years ago, Bridesmaids really stood out of here's our game changer. A comedy won a Academy Award. That's a huge thing,
and deservedly so.
And deservedly so.
That won an Academy Award.
It was at least nominated.
It was not, or
it was not at least.
Oh, okay. Whatever. Who gives a shit about the? Okay.
Now I'm curious.
Ooh, Casey.
Melissa McCarthy was nominated. Did she win? God, did she win?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Anyway, but what we're seeing though is that now that movies are really coming back into theaters, people are flocking to comedies, especially. I think.
Well, look at how well The Lost City's doing right now.
City, really well. Jackass Forever is doing really well. People are still talking about that. So I think it's stuff like that. I mean, Jackass isn't a narrative movie with like deep character moments. Yeah. It has the slapstick stuff we're looking for. It's kind of the last remnant of that. But besides that, like I think we're gonna see comedy still kind of be the standouts, hopefully. Obviously, aside from superhero movies making bajillions of dollars in theaters, comedies I think will kind of really stick out to people, especially now post-pandemic. People want to have fun, have good feelings, good vibes. Like one of my favorite movies we watched during the pandemic was Bill and Ted Face the Music.
Yeah.
It just felt like that was the movie we needed right now.
Right.
I think people are looking for more of that. So hopefully producers, Hollywood will continue to put out that type of content.
Well, and not to take digs at Johnny Knoxville, but in terms of how, I would almost contribute to the way that comedy is perceived right now is because of the 20 years that has been Jackass and Johnny Knoxville. Again, he found his lane, he stuck with it, he's made a boatload of money off it, and I'm not going to argue Johnny Knoxville for that. Absolutely not. But I think because because Jackass was successful, because everybody's like, okay, we need to go with that kind of slapstick. We need to go for the dumb humor. Is where it's like, now that if Jackass Forever is that final bow, because Johnny Knoxville's like, I'm getting too old for this shit anymore, that maybe that the studios are going to be like, all right, we're going to finally be able to move into another realm and maybe get back to that smart comedy again.
Well, and the frustrating thing about that is, like, I feel like it has this effect on comedy. So, like, Shelby, I know you like Wes Anderson because we're friends on Facebook and I see like all that stuff.
I love Wes.
Like, Wes Anderson is honestly, with Taika Waititi as one of the best comedy directors working today, every single one of his movies has been a comedy. Like, you cannot, like, that, and so many people like write them off as stuffy dramas because they're not the type of comedy that comes from like Jackass. But I'm sorry, I laugh more at the Grand Budapest Hotel than I do at like any other movie that's come out in the last decade. I love that movie. It's a masterpiece. It's like, one of the funniest things I've ever seen, and people don't even consider it a comedy.
Well, they don't get it. And there was The French Dispatch came out this past year, and it wasn't nominated for a single thing at the Academy.
Yeah, which was ridiculous.
It drove me
I loved it.
It's such a great film, and you have those little moments. You have those little moments in that film. I especially love the scene with the students, and it's like it's right out. It's Timothy Chalamet in a bathtub, and he's upset because Frances McDormand's looking down at him because I'm shy about my new muscles. I mean, it's a stupid line. It's so great, but it's so well
or just his little yelp when she opens the curtain.
Yes, I mean, it's so well done, and it's because it's smart and because it's a different kind of comedy than what we've seen in the past, especially in the past 20 years. I mean, people just it's clever, it's clever. It's clever. But it's not funny, and it's so disappointing. I'm really hoping that if we kind of push forward and as we continue, and especially like, Taika Waititi has gotten so much acclaim, and especially after Jojo Rabbit, I think we're moving into a smarter realm for comedy, which makes me happy because I love writing smart comedy. So maybe somebody will pick it up, that'd be great. But I mean,
right.
I'm hoping that we're moving towards that realm.
Yeah, I mean, a comedy did get nominated for Best Picture this year. Let's not forget.
Which comedy?
Don't Look Up.
I didn't laugh once at that movie. I reject
that movie's awful.
I reject that classification.
But I mean, think of all the movies we've brought up in the last 10 minutes. How different all of those are, and what you're looking for. And I think that's kind of where comedy is right now. You can get your Jackass, you can get your Adam Sandler, you can get your Wes Anderson, your Taika Waititi, your Jim Cummings, your darker horror comedies. And I think that's one reason comedy is kind of always evolving, is that not every comedy is going to work for everyone. Comedy is the most subjective genre, and it's all up to your own personal sense of humor, even more so because, like, romance, you understand what that is. It's human connection. Or horror, you can kind of understand what's scary. But like comedy, it's so damn subjective. I mean, but when we just recorded our bonus episode, you guys kind of scoffed when I brought up Dumb and Dumber. It's one of my favorite.
I don't like that movie.
It's one of my favorite movies ever, but I understand how it doesn't work for people too.
But you make mention that I think is part of it. What it is that when we look at certain subgenres of movies, of like a comedy versus a horror versus a romantic, a drama, a thriller, whatever the case is, that it's when we get into some of these movies that have so many subclassifications. Like you get into horror, you got your slasher flick, your possession, your monster movie, but then you get into comedy and there's the slapstick, there's a smart comedy, there's the Wes Anderson's. Like, I like the Royal Tenenbaums as much as I was not as much of a fan of the French Dispatch kind of thing. I understand what Wes Anderson does. He's just maybe not quite for me, but at the same time too, like, I love other types of comedy. I like The Mask, but I wasn't a big fan of Dumb and Dumber. There's so many, like, I think comedy because there's so many different ways to do funny that it gets so muddled. And I think that's one of the things that I think we run into sometimes, where like somebody's like, well, I don't like this, so I'm not gonna like any of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you even have like, I just watched Peter Rabbit 2 over Easter weekend because, you know, it's a rabbit movie, and why wouldn't you?
Why not?
And that movie like surprised me in how funny like it really was, because it's a slapstick comedy first and foremost, and like some of the stuff that like Domhnall Gleeson's doing is so funny. There's a scene where he's like he wants to be more frolicky, so he starts rolling down a hill with the rabbits, and it just gets worse and worse, and all of a sudden like there's this wide shot, and I swear they have like trampolines hidden under, because he's like bouncing down this hill ridiculously, and it's one of the funniest things I've seen. There's like he's trying to stop a car from going down a like steep road, and like there's just some great stunt work and like actual practical physical comedy in that movie that I'm just like, I mean, people write this off because it's Peter Rabbit 2, and I can't blame them, but I'm not gonna lie, that movie did give me some laughs. Like there's something for everybody.
I'm just gonna point out that Sam is praising a movie that is involving James Corden.
Yeah, I know he's the worst part of that. I do not like James Corden, but I don't have to see his face, so it helps, you know? Like
you technically don't have to in Cats either, Sam. I don't know if that's a positive or a negative.
I have never seen Cats all the way through. I fell asleep while watching it one night, and I had the weirdest dreams I've ever had.
What a nightmare fuel of a movie.
I don't know. I was home alone. It was like 1 a.m. I'm like, I'm going to watch Cats. And I threw it on and I fell asleep, and I didn't have hands in my dream. I had like, it wasn't paws either. I don't know what it was. So I was just like, I don't know. I'm done. I'm like, I'm out. I can't watch Cats. Like it freaked me out. It was like the worst hallucinatory, like trippy dream I've ever had. And I'm like, I can't do this.
You're like, I'm going to wake up. I'm going to flush my stash.
I'm going to try to segue us back sort of into Dracula Dead and Loving It / keep going with this conversation because I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's one I've had with friends before, and kind of on the current state of comedy is Leslie Nielsen in Dracula Dead and Loving It. And at this time, he's known as like the spoof guy. Naked Gun, Airplane.
Yeah, I was about to say he's an Airplane, right?
What else? Wrongfully Accused, Spy Hard, like all the like he is the spoof guy.
Which is why, like, when I knew of this movie, I was like, oh, this is a Leslie Nielsen spoof movie, not this is a Mel Brooks movie.
Even
from the outside, anyway.
So at the beginning of this, I said, why were people so down on this movie? Was it because of we had these kind of up and coming comedy guys coming up? Jim Carrey, Adam Sandler, Mike Myers, Chris Farley. Mm-hmm. Today, who are those actors that stick out as they're the comedic actors of 2022? Like, who are those people nowadays? Because I have such a struggle figuring out who they are anymore, and that really just stick in the comedy genre.
I would agree with that. There are so few actors right now that are just, this is my genre. I'm in comedy and this is what I do. And that aren't like coming from stand-up specifically, like making their movie. You know, I mean, it's very rare. And I'm wondering too if it's just we don't take comedy seriously. And to be able to become an actor, you have to, I've got to do serious roles, and this is what I have to do. I can't take just only comedy because I won't make any money.
Or is comedy the stepping stone to where I actually want to be? I want to see more actors where it's like comedy is my end game. Like Adam Sandler is one, you like him or you hate him, doesn't matter. You still understand Adam Sandler loves comedy.
Yeah.
And that's what he goes for.
He knows he it's one of those things, love or hate Adam Sandler. He stayed in his lane. He's occasionally deviated into the serious movies and whatnot, like Reign Over Me, kind of thing, whatever. But for the most part, he's like, my genre is comedy. And you made mention about some people using comedy as a stepping stone to get into something else. The first person I immediately thought of, which I think that's just because it's the genius and he's getting into everything that he wants to do, and it's Donald Glover. Is where he did the funny, but he's also like, I'm he's like, I'm not going to just stick to funny because I know that I can do Atlanta. I know I can do my music. I can do,
which I mean, Atlanta is funny,
everything.
but it's also very very
Serious.
real. Yeah. You know,
He might be the closest thing that I can think of where he's a little mix of comedy but serious and whatnot. But we don't really have anybody, like you said, Shelby. I can't picture anybody like as of today as a young actor that's like, this is where we know that this is the lane they're gonna stay in. We have got people that kind of tip their toe. Like I think of like Emma Stone will tip her toe occasionally or whatever, but for the most part, she stays relatively serious, you know. But I don't
God,
think
I wish she'd go funny more though, because she's a
Me
great
too.
comedic actress.
Great.
and that's what I mean. Like I think of like the funny moments of her like in Crazy Stupid Love. Like
Oh God,
there's a
I
great
watch that movie
ensemble
like once
cast
every 6 months.
of the mix of the old, like the older generation of comedy with a newer generation between her and Ryan Gosling and stuff like that. That's why that movie works.
Yeah.
And like even Ryan Gosling is like, I've heard nothing but good things of like The Nice Guys. Like
Yeah.
it sounds
Oh,
like
have you not seen it yet?
no.
Oh, dude, you gotta watch it. It's so good. It's ridiculous. Like he's a revelation in that movie. He's so good in that.
But
Um,
but I agree though. I think that a lot of these young actors are afraid to say that comedy is going to be their lane because they don't think, again, nobody takes it seriously enough to think that I can make a career out of it. I
it's
will
kind of
dabble in
become
the
what
genre.
horror was in the
Yeah.
80s, you know, where a lot of people are using low budget horror movies to kind of come up, and now you see a lot of people doing like, you know, web series or, you know, like little comedy shorts and things like that, because comedy is fairly cheap as long as you have a funny idea that you can do. Like you can shoot a comedy in your own apartment, no problem. Like comedy does not require special effects, or, you know, like you can do comedy pretty easy as long as you have a sense of humor. But it's also not what's going to win you the accolades, which I feel like there are people now that will come up, they'll do comedy and they'll dip their toe in the comedy water, but like if they want to be taken seriously with their craft, they have to do more serious roles.
Or they'll use that a little bit as like, all right, this is what people think of me right now. I'm going to do this comedy, and then people will think of me differently.
Yeah.
Zac Efron, Channing Tatum,
Yes.
Exactly.
even going back earlier, like looking at like
God.
Travolta was trying to make a comeback.
Yes.
All right, let me do some comedies to try to get back into the goodwill, or make people think of me in a different light. I mean, I think that's what kind of comedy is, right? Or like The Rock. The Rock was like the Disney guy.
Yep.
All right, let's do some comedies, and then now I can transition to be an action star because that's what I want to be. And I think like a lot of comedy though has made its way to TV, web series, that form of content, and away from movies, which I find just fascinating, very, very, very interesting how that that transition between the two. Because you look at like what are some of the great comedy pieces of art nowadays. You think of TV more likely. You're going to think of The Office, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Parks and Rec, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Atlanta. Like we're finding all that stuff in that form. So I don't know. I find it fascinating that we've made the transition basically from comedy is focusing in the movies. Now it's more of, I think, in long form TV shows.
Well, you make a very valid point that I was thinking of in terms of like, I think of like the show on Prime called Upload that I adore with Robbie Amell, and like a lot of these limited series, like the one you bring up on like HBO Max, which is in my queue, and I agree, I still need to sit down and I need to get it watched too, is the fact that we've made so much point early, especially I think like the early 2000s, where like we would get these comedies, but we would call them the dumb stupid comedies, where they're just there for the laughs. We didn't get a lot of character development. So now especially for the sake of streaming, and we have these companies that are willing to, instead of giving me 2 hours, you're going to give me 6 hours, you're going to give me 8 hours, and I can make a limited series. I can make 10 episodes at 45 minutes. I can actually give you a more fleshed out character that's still funny, to the point where it's like, instead of just giving me 90 minutes on a big screen, I'll take you giving me 5 hours and making 6 episodes that Amazon Prime's going to let me have.
Yeah.
I kind of think about like Barry.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up Barry.
Yeah,
yep.
Barry does that so well because, I mean, if you were to make Barry into a movie, there's no way that you could get into the character of Barry in that, hour, 20 minutes. You could never do it. But like within the show, I mean, you can flesh out, the characters of NoHo Hank. You have these great characters. And honestly, like, I mean, that cast is a fantastic ensemble cast. So I go to school at Emerson College. I'm getting my MFA there. And this past semester, we had to study Barry. And we had to write a script for that. So having to kind of go through and really critically study that show, it's so fascinating to see that development of comedy, and especially a dark comedy like that is. But, Bill Hader that was his therapy. He made that show as his own personal therapy. And I think that so much of comedy, and especially television, like with comedy, that's kind of the way that it's going as of late. This is kind of my own therapy. This is my own story. I'm going to make it funny. This is how I'm going to cope with things. And, we're not seeing that in television because we don't have that opportunity to really get that good character development that we need to get great, smart comedy anymore.
Yeah. You're even kind of seeing that with stand-up now, where stand-up comedians are more like, they're more interested in opening a vein and like showing you who they really are. Like you have Rothaniel, the new special that just came out. Why am I blanking on the comedian's name? His name is Rothaniel, but that's not what he goes by. And I'm trying to. It's Gerard. It's Gerard Carmichael. Yeah. And it's a new special on HBO where he talks about like his experience as a closeted gay man and coming out to his very conservative family. And it's funny, but it's also like, oh my God, it reminds me a lot. And Bo Burnham directed it. It reminds me a lot of Bo Burnham's Inside from last year.
I've heard of him.
Even really, Casey, you like Bo Burnham? I would never have guessed.
I've heard of the Bo before.
And that even like has kind of a precursor to, like Mike Birbiglia is a stand-up comedian, but really he just does one-man shows where he goes and he talks about a chunk of his life to a crowd. You have Chris Gethard's I can't remember what it's called, but his last HBO special was all about him living with depression and his suicide attempts. And like, these are all very heavy things that they talk about, and they manage to turn them around and still make them funny. But there's like a melancholy to it. And I'm just a sucker for it, and I think that's probably why like Wes Anderson's movies really get me, is because there's like a wicked sense of humor, but there's that level of melancholy under it. There's a real human emotion beneath it. And I love stuff like that. So I feel like maybe stand-up is starting to show where comedy is going to go from here. Because it definitely feels like there's a revolution kind of going on in the stand-up world. Even Jen Kirkman's latest comedy album, OK Gen X, deals with some very heavy stuff, and she's just hilarious. It's one of the best comedy albums I've heard in a long time.
Yeah.
And I make the statement is where some of the best comedy comes from the darkest places.
Yeah, absolutely.
That point though on stand-up, that actually kind of makes me question, especially with the popularity of Inside, because I mean it's such a well-crafted piece.
Yeah,
I mean
absolutely.
It's beautiful, but I mean it's technically a stand-up.
Yeah.
So is there a
somebody
point?
who agrees with me?
I mean, yeah, it's true. I mean, it's technically a stand-up piece. It's an art piece, but it's definitely stand-up.
It's not a film, Casey.
It is 100% a film.
I will say it's a film though, because it's beautiful. I love it. It's so close to my heart. But I mean, you kind of have that idea though of, will like comedy film become more like a stand-up piece?
Yeah.
How does this kind of track and evolve? Because there was actually, oh God, I can't remember her name. Ilsa Schlesinger, I think that's her name.
Oh yeah,
She came out with a film on Netflix, I think last year, about this horrible date experience that she had about this guy who, it's a real story about this guy who catfished her and like tried to like steal her money and stuff. I mean,
that movie's good.
It's a great movie, but
I've heard of this. I haven't watched it yet.
But it plays like a stand-up piece.
Okay.
And it feels like, I mean, she's starting it off as if she's on stage and she's doing her stand-up, she's doing her monologue, and it ends with her doing her monologue. I mean,
cool.
is that kind of a future for comedy of, will stand-up comedians kind of take over this narrative of, here is my feature film, and it's put out exactly like a monologue.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
That's that's an interesting concept, because I do feel like there's potential there. Like, with as popular as that brand of stand-up is, I feel like people aren't watching movies in a typical sense. At least younger people aren't really watching movies in the sense that I think the four of us do. You know, it's just the art form is changing, and that's not a bad thing. It's what happens. You know, it's different making movies now than it was back in 1931 when they made the original Dracula. You know, it's even different than when we've talked about how different it is making a movie nowadays compared to even in 95 when Mel Brooks was making Dracula Dead and Loving It. You know, that the industry's always been shifting. I think we're seeing a bigger shift than what we've ever seen before with the industry right now. But I don't think the panic that we're seeing from maybe like the elder statesmen of film is as justified as you know it should be. I don't think film is going anywhere.
No,
if that makes
and it's just it again, like you said, it's just evolving, changing. What the pandemic did is kind of just speed up everything that film and the industry was leading towards anyway. We were leading towards things are gonna just end up on streaming, and very few movies, if any, will be in theaters, and it'll kind of be this novelty type of thing. We're seeing that now. Like, you're gonna get your big movies out in the theaters, but then a month later you can watch it at home. I think that's just going to continue to evolve. And I think in terms of like what a movie is going to change. That's why I argue so hard for Inside of it being a movie. It's not a traditional 3-act structure of a movie, but it is still a narrative form of content that is, if you want to throw into something being a movie, being a feature length, it's still a feature length movie. Definitely. But like Sam was saying, how people consume content, especially younger generations, is changing. We're getting like TikTok, which is like 60-second long, whatever. I don't even know.
But there are some good filmmakers on TikTok.
Is.
There's some interesting shit going on with that. Like
YouTube too. Like, that's where, like, for me, like, some of the scariest stuff I've seen in the last couple of years comes from YouTube shorts. It's not from a feature length film with a bunch of marketing and money behind it. It's from people who are passionate and love something so much that they're going to just go out, make it, and put it out there online for people to consume.
Well, I think that's part of the thing, though, is like, especially with the pandemic, and I think that something that the studios are getting wrong right now is there's such a mass panic for content. And we're just kind of going it with the way that the old guard has traditionally put out content. And we've got a lot of just mediocre work, and we're not tapping into a lot of the work that we're seeing on TikTok or YouTube, or, you know, I mean, we're here in the Midwest. Why is there not a studio trying to tap into the potential of a different area? You know, we're sticking to our coast, we're sticking to New York, we're sticking significantly to LA. And I think right now is with these content wars and with the push to create as much content as possible, even if it's mediocre, I think it's so hard to stand out against that, especially because, I mean, the pandemic, we're sitting at home, we're not doing anything, we can't go out, we're mindlessly consuming. How do we stand out as content creators in a world where everyone's mindlessly consuming and not paying any attention to what's going on screen?
Right.
You know, I'm hoping that some of these studios kind of take what we're seeing and taking these fantastic creators that we're seeing online and using them to create great works, because I think, you know, the next Mel Brooks could be there. The next great ensemble cast could be there, you know, without a doubt. I mean, there's so many great, fantastic writers on TikTok and so many great actors that they're just untapped potential.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I think slowly but surely we're starting to see that. I mean, just like a couple of things off the top of my head that we're seeing of people who were doing stuff online and kind of found their way into Hollywood was like the guy who did the deep fake of Mark Hamill.
Yep.
Ended up working for Lucasfilm like a year later.
Yep.
The guys who helped choreograph some of the fights in like Shang-Chi and Everything Everywhere All at Once were just two guys a couple guys that shot YouTube videos, and someone saw it and said, we should hire these guys. And now that's their job. That's what they do for a living, is they're stunt coordinators now because of content they put onto YouTube, which I find fascinating. I mean, like Mr. Burnham was a guy who started on YouTube in his bedroom, and now he's my favorite content creator right now. And I think that's the trend that we're starting to see. And I think that's just going to continue to grow and evolve. And who knows, maybe the next Mel Brooks or Leslie Nielsen is making silly little videos on YouTube or TikTok right now, and we're just waiting for them to fall down the steps in a feature-length film.
You used one term there, though, that I think is part of the reason why I think we're kind of in the rut that we are, for the sake of that, though, is that we're looking for the next batch of the content creators. I don't want content. I want quality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't want you to have, if you're going to give me 6 hours, give me 6 hours of quality. I don't, I don't want somebody who's just going to turn and burn whatnot or cases. And I think that's part of the thing that we're running into. It's where, like, yes, are there good things? Like, have I fallen down the rabbit hole that is TikTok and found musical artists that I'd never heard of before, that they're using that medium to be able to get noticed and whatnot? Absolutely. Are there artists and whatnot? But at the same time, too, they're, like you said, they're throwing up 60-second videos, wherever the case is, just so they can be seen and whatnot, and I think that's the problem we're running into, is that the attention span has gotten to that of a goldfish, where it's just like, oh, I can't look at anything more than 60 seconds, so all I can do is just turn and burn content. It's like, just give me quality over quantity.
When you really have to stand out too in that world. Because you have people right now where that's how long they can pay attention to something. You have your 60 seconds. I mean, it would be very hard to take a scene in Dracula Dead and Loving It where there is no camera movement. You have just stage play setting. It's so difficult to be able to do that in a modern setting, because without that movement, without something happening, it's hard to keep people's attention on it, which is sad. Because I think we're missing out on a lot of great content, and especially a lot of great quality content from filmmakers and artists who may not have the means to do much more than that. And I mean, I don't know. I'd like to see us get to a place where we have longer attention spans. That'd be fantastic. I would very much enjoy that. And B, we're tapping into the potential of these smaller creators, like a book.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating.
This has been a tremendous conversation.
All from Dracula Dead and Loving It.
There's a lot there.
There is.
There is. There's about 40 minutes of us talking about the movie and another hour of us exploring everything, talking about comedy. It's fascinating. So I guess let's get to our final thoughts on Dracula Dead and Loving It. Man, I'll start it off, because this is the first time watch. I fell in love with this movie right away. I thought it was a great satire comedy and a great adaptation of Dracula. It is, like we have said throughout the entire month, Mel Brooks makes great movies first. It just so happens that they're comedies, and this is definitely one of them. This is a great movie. I gave it 4 out of 5. I think it's going to be in my rotation of Mel Brooks movies alongside Young Frankenstein and Spaceballs. And I think, again, continues our trend of our theory from Blazing Saddles that we had, is you're going to probably lean towards the genre or type of movie that you already love as your favorite Mel Brooks movie. So I think that just continues the trend here for me.
Yeah, I would like to read a text that Casey sent me on yesterday. Gosh, it's only Monday. Holy shit, I'm 10 minutes into Dracula, and I can already tell this is my jam.
Yeah. Dracula Dead and Loving It is my jam.
At least you weren't dead while you were loving it.
No, I am alive and loving it.
Alive and loving it.
I'm dead and loving it because I'm very tired tonight. But I love this movie. It's Leslie Nielsen might be my I can't even say, like, I love all the Draculas except for Frank Langella.
You leave Frank Langella alone.
I will not leave Frank Langella alone.
He's a great Skeletor. Knock it off.
He got his ass fired by Mike Flanagan. Good for Mike. Actually, no, seriously, good for Mike. That was.
Anyway,
I was proud to see that. Anyways, yeah, we're moving on. Dracula Dead and loving it. I love this movie. It's probably my favorite pairing of Drac and Renfield too. I can't remember who said that earlier, but yeah, it's a tremendous movie. It's a great satire. It does what Mel Brooks does the best, and it does it really well. And it is undeserving of an 11% on the tomato meter. I cannot believe that. I also gave it a 4 out of 5 because anybody that doesn't like this movie needs an enema and a straitjacket.
In that order.
Yes, in that order.
Actually, no. Reverse that order. It'd be more difficult for them.
Yeah. Yeah, those people get the straitjacket and then the enema.
No, I completely agree. I went into this movie completely blind. Like I said, I mean, until we started talking about it and realized it's Mel Brooks and whatnot, but you can clearly tell this is a Mel Brooks movie. But it has the comedic genius of Leslie Nielsen to help shoulder that movie and whatnot. And again, he's not trying to redo Dracula. He's trying to basically just tell his funny version of, and basically play an homage. And I think I agree with you, Sam. I think the critics only given this 11% need to reevaluate this movie and go back and correct their scores because they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. I agree. I think mine was at 4. It was either 4, 4.5 or something like that because I laughed at all the shtick. I mean, for me, all the jokes land. We've run into other Mel Brooks ones where like some of the jokes don't land.
This holds up more than most Mel Brooks movies, actually.
Exactly. And that's where I wish that Mel Brooks would have continued to keep making movies because I think that there was still more to be tapped and whatnot. So I would definitely encourage anybody to watch this movie.
I would say definitely a 4 out of 5 for me. Obviously I'm biased. I love this movie. Like growing up, I think it's great. I think it's awesome. We all know this. And I think it's such a great way too for like early comedy writers to break in and watch this and learn from it. And I agree that 11% I think is unjustified due to the amount of copious research that was put into this. I think it's all very smart. The production design is genius throughout it. I mean, especially the costuming is great. I mean, everybody else looks fantastic, and then there's Dracula. I mean, it's great.
Coming out here like Count Chocula in his
It's
costume.
great. It's so smart, and it's just a stupid thing. I mean, they could have easily put him in something just beautiful, but no.
Yeah.
Walmart costume it is. I love it.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's a lot of untapped potential to come out of this. I really hope that we kind of come together collectively and make this a solid cult classic and learn from it. And I don't know. I have high hopes that someday this will be recognized. And I'm going to push back against you, Brian. I do like that this was his last real, Mel Brooks work because I think he ended on a good note.
I won't argue that. At least if you're going to retire, because again, I agree, the 11% is wrong.
Very wrong.
But at least if you're going to be like, this is my last movie, this would be a movie I would be proud to say this is my last movie.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I just say is the fact that I've enjoyed the Mel Brooks of movies that I've always watched, and I wish I would have more. Is not necessarily to say that I wish that there was more past this, but it's just I want more Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
And I know I'm not going to get it because when you made the comment, Casey, about the resurgence of this movie and everything like that, I think the only thing that is going to do it is going to be the unfortunate and untimely death of Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, he is working on the new History of the World Part 2.
Yeah.
Mcnichol. So I'm hoping maybe that'll come out and people go, okay, let's revisit Mel Brooks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe this podcast episode will do it.
It'll do it.
Yeah. This is gonna go viral.
Yep.
We're gonna get a job working at Skywalker Ranch because of this podcast.
Mowing the lawn, maybe. But that's
Yeah.
all right.
Hey, you know what? If I had that opportunity, Casey, I would put that on my resume because it'd be like, you worked at Skywalker Ranch? I mowed the lawn, but yes,
I was there.
Yeah.
I was there. I was employed.
I mean, they weren't paying me, but I was mowing the lawn anyways.
All right, last question then, and I'm going to throw a second wrinkle into it as we've been doing this month. If your guys are going to watch Dracula Dead and Loving It again, what movie are you going to pair it with? And you cannot pick another Mel Brooks movie or another Dracula movie.
I've got one. I don't think anybody else is going to pick this as a double feature. But
Okay, go for it.
I love these goofy, like this movie is goofy, and it takes from like Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula and the 1931 Dracula, but it also takes from like the 60s Hammer horror, that like era, I think the opening credits are very reminiscent of like the old Christopher Lee movies. And in that aspect, I'm going to go with another kind of parody of that like Hammer horror, Roger Corman, cheap 60s vibe. And I'm going to go with Elvira's Haunted Hills, which I just absolutely love that movie. I just got Maria just gifted me the like special Arrow Blu-ray for Christmas, and I haven't cracked it open yet. I'm waiting to go down to like the theater room in my complex and watch it the way I've always wanted to. And so yeah, I'm really excited to check that out. And it's so fun. It's goofy. It's got a ton of references to like the old Vincent Price Poe adaptations, like Pit and the Pendulum and all that. It's a wild movie, but I love it. And I love Elvira. So she's great. And I think actually out of her two movies, that's the one I prefer. I love Mistress of the Dark, but Haunted Hills is it's on another level. I dig it. So yeah, that's my double feature.
I'm gonna go the Leslie Nielsen route, and I'm gonna go with Airplane. Just simply because the fact that what Mel Brooks is doing here is he's paying for the sake of Mel Brooks, he's paying homage to Dracula and whatnot, but we get to keep the through line with Leslie Nielsen. And if there's one thing that Airplane basically tells us is back in the late 70s and the early 80s and whatnot, we were getting way too many disaster movies involving airports and airplanes to the point where they're like, we need to make fun of this shit. And we're going to get some of the funny people of that era, Leslie Nielsen, Lloyd Bridges, to give us a spoof of it. And clearly and obviously this is more of the spoof than it is the homage, like what Dead and Loving It is, but whatnot. But basically just to be able to, like, you know what, we're just going to have all as much fun, but we're still making it a disaster movie in the process.
Yeah.
I am going to go with another 90s horror comedy that features a lot of slapstick, and a movie I felt was pretty influential, especially this director, during that splatter scene involving
Steven Weber
and Mel Brooks. I'm going to go with Sam Raimi's Army of Darkness. I want to pair Bat Leslie Nielsen with tiny little Bruce Campbell's running around. Like that's a perfect double feature to me. So yeah, Army of Darkness and Dracula Dead and Loving It, I think would play really well together.
God,
absolutely.
I wish I would have got a Leslie Nielsen Bruce Campbell movie now.
My lights just went out.
Oh my gosh.
Whoa.
Okay, I'm in the dark. Here we are.
Welcome
Hold on. It'll work. I'm okay. We can see me.
Now we're gonna talk Poltergeist movies now.
Let's not do that.
We're making the sequel to
I'm not
Host.
gonna lie, I feel like I'm getting cursed just being on this call right now.
Be scared. Be very scared. Be very afraid.
If my ring light goes out, I'm gonna scream.
We're coming after you. You know what though? I think on my side of it, I think I would kind of lean into the satire, and I would pair it with a young Michael Keaton movie. I would pair it with Johnny Dangerously. Which nobody ever knows that movie, and I absolutely adore it. But it has the exact same pacing as Dracula Dead and Loving It, and I recommend it to everyone. It is so dumb, but it's cleverly stupid.
Amy Heckerling directed it? Oh yeah, I'm in. I am in.
It's great. It's great. I mean, the opening credits is all Weird Al. I mean, you can't get any better than that.
Oh, sweet.
No, Johnny Dangerously is again one of those other iterations of the old Michael Keaton that I miss, that I wish we would get more. Like he's dabbled in it on occasion, like I think of like the other guys and whatnot, but like I want funny Michael Keaton again.
Me too.
Yeah.
He's hilarious in Morbius.
Give me multiple. I want to see multiplicity again. I think
that's
that is
cool.
Great. That makes me want to rewatch that. I have not watched that movie in years.
It's such a good movie. I love it. So I recommend.
I just added it to my watch list because I'm like,
come on,
that
Joe
sounds right up my alley.
It's great. I mean, the casting in it is fantastic, and I don't know. It's so dumb, but it's wonderful. It's a great.
Hey, it's got a Mel Gibson alumni, Dom DeLuise.
That is true.
Mel Brooks, wrong Mel. Very different Mel.
But yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad.
I didn't catch that.
That's the second time we've brought up Mr. Gibson. They are very, very different people.
Slightly.
No, I was practicing before this. I was like, don't say Mel Gibson. Don't say Mel. No, don't do it.
If you say Mel Gibson 3 times on a Zoom call, he will come to you.
I'm in the dark. I hope not.
Yeah.
Master Commander is going to come running out of me.
He's gonna come looking at. Mel Gibson's just gonna show up in the fat Santa outfit.
Oh man,
I don't need it.
All right. Well, this has been a blast. This has gone all the best ways possible in this episode. This was a great discussion. Dracula Dead and Loving It. Go check it out. It needs to find its resurgence on online and have a little bit of a cult following to it. So. Let's wrap this thing up. Let's get to the plugs here. If you like this, you may hear the rest of our Mel Brooks series. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and on YouTube to hear the rest of our series. Spoiler alerts. This is the best of the series.
Yeah, this is the best episode we've done this month for sure. Yeah.
Sorry, Dave Holly. Sorry, Tad.
I'm so happy I've been a part of it.
This has been I mean, I think it's mostly because the movie is my favorite of.
Oh, I'm going to take credit for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all you.
I knew it.
You've classed us up. We actually talked about real things instead of.
Keep bringing me on. I'll come on. I can talk about stuff.
I'm pretty sure we made that comment the last time she was on.
I think so.
I think we did. Yeah.
That she provides us class.
Mm-hmm. Shelby, you're really good at keeping us constructive.
Thank you. It's the teacher side of me. It's a problem.
Right.
That's why I was never a very good teacher.
All right. Be sure to check us out: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd HQ, all at Backlot 605. Sam.
And if you like this and you want more, you can check us out on patreon.com/backlot605. We've got a really fun Patreon episode dropping this week where we're talking about like 5 favorite movies that we haven't talked about on the podcast yet. And it's fun. We just recorded it. It was a blast. This whole night's been a blast. So check it out on Patreon. Check us out on all the other ways they just told us. I'm so tired. I love everybody. I love you guys.
Don't
That's
worry,
all
Sam.
I've got.
I will take the last plug here.
Okay.
Again, coming up May 14th at Average Joe's Gaming, we're going to be doing a Marvel Cinematic Universe countdown with our friends at Wednesday Comics, a comic book look. Fat Dude Digs Flicks, Charlie Eccles, and Jess Johansson. They're all going to be joining us for our Avengers-style team-up type of podcast. We're going to have, how many people is that? is that 9? 12?
Not 12, yeah.
12 people
math.
on the podcast at one time. It's going to be chaos. It's going to be anarchy. We're going to need an infinity gauntlet to control us all. So again, coming up May 14th, MCU Countdown, Average Joe's Gaming, 6 o'clock in T, South Dakota. Last but certainly not least, Shelby, where can the people find anything and everything that you are doing online?
I'm all over the Facebooks. Film La Femme, you can follow that on Facebook. It's also Spotify, YouTube, all over there. We're going to have another episode coming out the first week of May, so you can check that out. And then, of course, I'm making my feature Between the Lines right now, and you can find that on Facebook and Instagram as well. It's also on IMDb, and I'm with Bitter Hipster Films in Sioux Falls, or in Sioux City. So, of course, I'm based in Sioux Falls right now, but you can find us all over online.
Nice.
Awesome. This has been so much fun. This episode's been an absolute blast. Shelby, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This has been awesome. I'm glad we went full circle from Coppola to Brooks. We made it there, and it was so much fun. So, yeah, I guess let's wrap this thing up. It's like 10 o'clock here, so let's wrap this thing up. Let's go to bed. Let's fall asleep into our coffins, and then wake up in the morning and hit our head on a chandelier. So I guess that's how we're gonna end this here. For Sam Lenz, Brian Mensing, I'm Casey Kelderman. Thank you all again for listening. We'll check you out next time right here on the Backlot of South Dakota. Bye.